I'm Rosie Mendoza.
I'm Michaela Snyder.
I'm Megan Burr.
I'm Ben Stanford.
And I'm Lauren Russell, and our question was, how do the nationwide education standards have an impact on Native Americans in their future? So, to first understand the magnitude of this issue, we must understand what the nationwide education standards actually are. While entering into the new millennium, there was a new emphasis on education. President George Bush enacted the No Child Left Behind Act in 2001. Later, the Common Core, a set of educational standards utilized in the United States, was established in order to reach certain goals in a student's K through 12 years. These national education standards have been found to have an opposite effect on their goals, with many students, particularly Native Americans, being left behind due to the fact that they are not readily equipped for these tests.
The No Child Left Behind Act was created to raise relatively low academic achievements by minority students, including Native Americans. However, even with efforts like this implemented, it seems as if Native American educational success has not improved. As you can see, Native American graduation rates are low, and their SAT scores are 100 points less than their white peers in the United States. This puts Native Americans at the bottom of the learning spectrum.
As of 2008, 183 Bureau of Indian Education schools were implemented in over 64 reservations in the United States, but only 7% of natives actually attend these schools. That means that 93% of Native Americans are attending public schools that don't benefit them. When looking at the test scores of Native Americans in comparison with other demographics, it's clear that the education system is failing them. The math ACT and the reading ACT scores, passing at college level between whites and natives, there's a huge gap in between both. During Aaron Huey's TED Talk, he explains how the school dropout rate on Pine Ridge Reservation is a whopping 70%, and the teacher turnover rate is 8 times higher than the U.S. national average. It's imperative that we find a solution to this problem, but as Aaron Huey conceded, the suffering of indigenous peoples is not a simple issue to fix.
So Native Americans have been oppressed throughout time, starting about the 1800s when government officials forced them off their land and to live on reservations. In about 1819, the federal government started mission schools. The teachers for these schools were just normal people who were paid up to $10,000 a year just to live among and teach natives. There is no support or evidence to prove that these teachers actually taught or mentored the natives. These so-called teachers had never been taught to teach or how to mentor them. Another option was federally funding boarding schools, which were established in 1879. The government thought this was a possible solution to the so-called Indian problem. For the tens of thousands of Indian children who attended these boarding schools, it was a time of disparity and decretion of culture. The native children who went to these boarding schools experienced assimilation, which is the process of taking in and fully understanding information and ideas. Indigenous children who went to boarding schools often suffered immense amounts of pain, beatings, and sexual abuse, in a place where they were supposed to be able to learn and be safe. Many of these children committed suicide by hanging themselves. The average age for committing suicide in these boarding schools was the young age of 6. Many children who experienced boarding schools and their harsh social curriculum ended up as alcoholics or homeless.
The National Indian Education Association is an advocacy group in the state of Washington. This group grants Title I funds to schools with large percentages of Native Americans. The funds originally consisted of a $14.5 billion pot of money, but due to sequestration, that money was reduced to $727 million, meaning they thought the money should go to something more important.
Also going off a bend, in 1819, the United States government established the Civilization Fund, which was the first federally funded act that directly affected Native American children. Also in the early 1900s, the boarding school curriculum started to solely be based about economic standpoints in the industrial, making sure that the Native children were ready and fit to be among the whites in the white world. And while the actual education side of it lacked and almost was non-existent.
The rate at which Native American teens use drugs is unhealthy. According to the American Psychological Association, Native American teens have higher rates than the national average in the usage of cigarettes, marijuana, and non-medical uses of prescription drugs. The suicide rates as well are taking their toll. According to the Center of Native American Youth, suicide amongst Native American females was 22% and 12% for Native American males, and 5% of these teens really considered committing suicide.
When faced with the factors of such a grueling home life, the Natives' education starts to take a toll. They don't have the same resources and time to study and learn the material at the same pace and level that the educational standards are holding them to. As Rosie said, substance abuse is one of the #1 reasons of this unbalanced home life. Alcoholism is also an example of this and has plagued Native American families for generations.
From an economic standpoint, the average annual income for a Native American household in 2014 was $37,227. Compare this to the national average in 2014, which was $53,000. This is a great example of Native Americans being below average and under the poverty line.
From Ben's research, we can conclude that a great deal of Native Americans live in impoverished communities, and this leads to a poor school system. Not every child receives the same amount of aid, and many children are not given the resources to meet this fixed goal. So there is a clear paradox in the placement of national education standards on every student. The national guideline requires health and safety inspections to occur annually. However, in 2015, only 1/3 of schools received inspections, according to the audit by the Government Accountability Office.
So what Lauren is saying is that living conditions on these reservations are terrible and are even comparable to that of third world countries, as stated by the NRC programming partners. According to the Housing Assistance Council, Native American homes on reservations that are overcrowded are 3 to 6 times more overcrowded than overcrowded homes in the United States. This shows the lack of basic necessities Native Americans receive.
When Rosie said that living conditions on reservations are comparable to third world, she wasn't exaggerating. With 90% of Native Americans living under the poverty line and 4 to 8 out of 10 Native adults being unemployed, the home life of a Native American child can be incredibly hard to deal with.
Counterargument. Most people would claim that there is nothing left to do to improve the Native American education. The government already provides funding and financial aid to these reservations. There have also been some Native American schools implemented on the reservations. Nevertheless, these improvements are not enough to help Native Americans survive.
So one of our solutions would be to create more efficient ways to use the funding for Native American schools. The U.S. Department of Education established the Title VII Civil Rights Act in 2014. This act was a promise to continue the collaboration with local educational agencies such as the Bureau of Indian Affairs. This act stated that all reservation schools are eligible for a grant under Section 7112. This grant could be any amount necessary over $3,000 each. This money could go towards something as simple as an elementary school reading program at reservation schools to help elementary school kids keep on track for reading.
The Common Core seems like a substantial system for educational standards to the regular United States student. It still cannot fully help the diversity of students that are in the school system. So by creating an education system that encompasses the lives of a variety of different backgrounds, in the long run will benefit Native Americans, since it'll be more efficient and they'll have a better school environment to help them achieve their academic goals.
Another vital solution is to not ignore the issue. Throughout history, we find that when people are willing to share their voice, there are steps taken to fix problems. Advocacy about Native education is a must in order to fix the disparities in our education as a whole.
One of the biggest influencers of general education is Albert Einstein. One of his philosophies was his famous quote, "Fish can't climb trees." This coincides with the idea of placing the same standards on every student. If you give all animals the same task of climbing a tree, clearly the fish will not complete this objective. This is analogous to placing the same standards of education on every student, because not all students have the necessary assets to accomplish this goal. The current education standards are discriminatory and are having negative consequences on the future of Native Americans. Therefore, it is not ethical to continue on the path that we are today. Thank you.
you. Couple of questions. Lauren, how did the group decide to include Megan's perspective or lens or conclusions into the overall presentation?
So the lens that Megan was focusing on was the futuristic lens. So this was really vital to our presentation when we were coming up with the call to actions. In Megan's lens, we saw a glance at what the future would look like if we implemented our goals. And through this, we were able to come up with our solutions such as advocacy and fighting for Native American rights and funding education. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben, reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem your group identified?
I would have to say Michaela, because she did the historical lens, and just reading her research really helped me pinpoint on which parts of my research I wanted to include in our presentation, because it really connected the dots for me and I was able to understand how it all fit together.
Thanks. Megan, what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' individual reports that you decided to exclude from your team presentation, and why?
An argument that we decided to exclude from our presentation was one of Lauren's, which was that the education of Native Americans was being violated by the Constitution, that we weren't following the Constitution. We decided to leave that out because it wasn't as compelling of an argument as most of our other arguments.
Thank you. Michaela, describe an argument from one of your peers' individual reports that made you think differently about your team's solutions or conclusions.
One of the arguments that was taken was Ben's with the economic lens of how most of them live under the poverty line, and it helped me because it just shows, it proved my research was right about how from back in the 1900s how they were still living below the poverty line and they still aren't getting the necessities that they were needing to survive and thrive in the everyday world, and to prove that to this day that they still weren't getting it really helped me feel good about my research that I did.
Thank you. And last, Rosie, in what way did you improve your ability to work with a group as a result of this project?
I think in general I don't really like working in groups, but from this group I learned better communication skills and more confidence about talking about what I want to say and how things should work, and yeah.